For half a century, WJPZ Syracuse has been the greatest media classroom on the planet.
We've trained students from the 1970s to the 2020s on how to run a professional radio station.
But the lessons learned and relationships formed go far beyond studios and transmitters.
Taking a look back through the eyes of those who experienced it.
This is WJPZ at 50.
Welcome to WJPZ at 50. I am John Jagay, and for our first episode, it was really a no-brainer who to have as a guest. Throughout our podcast series, you're going to hear folks refer to the family of WJPZ. Well, the unofficial father of the family would be our guest today, who helped put the station on the air 50 years ago. Welcome, Dr. Rick Wright, to the podcast.
Wow, what a fantastic treat this is for the whole professor. Wow. I was checking my email the other day, and there was JG John Gay saying, "Hey, Rick, I'm putting together a 50th anniversary show, and I'm going to do all these interviews with all these incredible WJPZ major market types all over the world now. And this is the year 2022. And I said, John, why me? So, John, I'm not just a father. I'm getting older. I'm the grandfather of WJPZ Radio as we broadcast live from Syracuse, New York, from the top of the mountain, Olympus.
The top of Mount Olympus for the station and your new digs on top of Bird Library.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm up in the faculty commons for all the great WJPZ family as a professor emeritus of the famous S.I. Newhouse School of Public Communications. Got access to a lot of nights. It's beautiful setup up here on the 5th floor and everything I really need to get this book. By the way, I'm working on a book. I turned up the radio that I've been promising all of you, and a lot of WJPZ's history is in the book. And this is the environment that I'm working in right now to get the book written.
We are thrilled to hear that, and you've mentioned the book many times at a banquet, as many of the fellow alumni have heard. I'd like to ask if you would tell, somewhat briefly, how the station started, Craig Fox and Bill Bliley and all those guys back at 50 years ago, because for those who haven't heard the story, maybe some of our younger alumni or current students, how did this whole thing get started 5 decades ago?
Well, John, in my case, I came to Syracuse originally in 1970. As a doctoral fellow to get my PhD here at Syracuse in instructional technology. And my two greatest mentors who got me here, Dr. Larry Myers. In fact, Dr. Myers just died last year. He made it to 100 years old, was the chair of the radio television program here at Syracuse. And Dr. Donald P. Ely, who was the head of the Center for Instructional Communications. He was our top audiovisual, educational media, radio, and television scholar here at Syracuse University. And I came here first in 1970 as a doctoral fellow. And while here, I worked local radio, WOLF, and then I had a full-time gig at WNDR. And I was Rick Wright all through the night. What I didn't realize at that time when I was on air, all the Syracuse University radio TV majors were checking my show out. I'm still hearing this to this very day. And among that group were guys like Bob Costas, the great sportscaster, of course. Bob's kind of in semi-retirement now. And, of course, Bill Bliley and Craig Fox. So let's fast forward. I spent my couple of years here at Syracuse getting all my doctoral coursework done, and I was trying to get my dissertation rolling. And then I got a phone call from my graduate school, where I got my master's degree at North Carolina Central University at Durham. Mm-hmm. So I took a pause and I said, maybe I could get my research done on the road. In fact, I was really collecting data. God works in mysterious ways for me. So I go down to Durham, North Carolina, and I'm on faculty at North Carolina Central University and ended up working at WDNC, which is the flagship radio station, the Duke Radio Sports Network, and the Durham Morning Herald. I'll know the story. I'm getting to the JPZ part of this now. I can just try to lay the foundation out.
Sure.
So I've also ended up acting general manager and program director of another station, WLLE in Raleigh, an urban station at 570 on the dial. And then, of course, teaching at North Carolina Central University. Well, after a year in North Carolina, things are going great, but I said, I don't want to get comfortable. I still got to get my doctoral degree finished up at Syracuse. So I left there and went to Trenton, New Jersey, and I was general manager of WTNJ in Trenton, New Jersey. Trenton has, on the bridge that goes across the Delaware River, they have a big slogan, Trenton makes the world takes. And I'll tell you, as a old professor, as a manager of a radio station located between New York City and Philadelphia, I got taken. In that case, I had a lot of fun, learned a lot. And so I left there, and through the Syracuse University, a great alumni family of great broadcasters, Mr. Russell Tolliver, who was head of NBC Radio, New York City, offered me a gig, and I ended up going to Washington, D.C., working at WRC, WKYS Radio, and also I ended up on faculty at Howard University. Okay, now it's getting up close to spring of 1975, and I got a phone call. Best phone call I ever got in my life. It was from Syracuse University. Dean Hank Schulte, who was the dean of the Newhouse School, Dr. Larry Myers was on the phone, and Dr. Don Ely, all three. Mm-hmm. And they indicated to me that, hey, Roosevelt, we just finished building Newhouse 2 of the Newhouse School, and that they started, I think they dedicated it in 1974. And Mr. William S. Paley, who's the president of CBS, was the person who dedicated the building. So Dr. Ely and Dr. Myers and Dean Schulte were on the phone. They said, Roosevelt, we now have the best radio, television, teaching production facility probably in the United States of America, Building 2 of the SI Newhouse School of Public Communications. And the Board of Trustees has offered some new faculty lines and need more faculty. And it said the search committees have met. Everybody's talking about a guy who was here at Syracuse named Rick Wright. And they said, Rick, and then Dr. Ely said, okay, now we got to get you back to Syracuse and get your doctoral degree finished up. And we also want to offer you a position on faculty at the Newhouse School. So, to my great WJPZ family, I leave Washington, D.C., head back to Syracuse, and I hit back here at Syracuse August of 1975. Came up the famous Interstate 81, John, that you know all about, you know, and all you JPZers.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, I meet with Dr. Larry Myers, and Dr. Myers said, okay, Roosevelt, welcome aboard. Here are the keys to your office. My office was 381 in the Newhouse School, Newhouse 2 building. And so I get into my office, you know, it's bare. I got to put the books in. There were no computers in those days, you know, cell electric typewriters.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to fix my office up pretty good. And I'd only been there, I think I had been in maybe I was on my third trip to my office. And John, a famous knock came at my door. Hey, Dr. Rick, Professor Wright, are you in there? And I said, yes, guys, hold on one second. And I went to the door and opened up the door, and standing in my door, 381 Newhouse School, Building 2, was Craig Fox and Bill Bliley. And at that time, Bill Bliley was the general. He was I'll get to that point in just a minute. Well, Bill and Craig Fox are there, and they walk in and they say, Professor, Dr. Myers indicated that you were on your way back, and we remember you a few years ago when you were here as a grad student. I think they were like freshmen or whatever. I said, yeah, guys, I'm here. I said, man, we need a radio professor, and you're the answer to our dreams. I said, look, we have already started a new radio station on campus, and the call letters are WJPZ. And I said, hey, those call letters sound pretty nice, guys. And they said, hey, we got the call letter rhyme scheme from WABC.
In New York City.
And at the time, Music Radio 77, WABC was the powerhouse of America with my old buddy Chuck Leonard, you know, Dan Ingram, Harry Harrison doing the mornings, and all those guys, you know. And of course, so I said, okay, guys, great. They said, but sir, we got a problem. I said, what's the problem? The university is trying to kick us off campus. I said, kick you all off campus? Or why? They said, well, really, we got all of the old WAER broadcast equipment. Here's the story, WJPZ family. Newhouse 2 was built, creating new broadcast studio facilities for WAER, which at that time was completely student-run and operated. And, of course, the early building for WAER, it was built in 1946 when WAER went on the air with Dr. Myers and Dean Kenneth Bartlett and all. And it became really the first low-powered FM radio station on the non-commercial band in the United States of America. So can you imagine a building where a radio station has been in since 1946? And now it's 74. Well, the building had got to a stage of dilapidation. Historic building right behind Carnegie Library here at Syracuse University.
Mm-hmm.
So they didn't need all that equipment, that new building's up, brand new, Harris audio boards, everything up on the 4th floor of the Newhouse School with the new facilities for WAER radio. So the old WAER broadcast equipment, before they tore the building down, what did they do with the equipment? They took all the equipment and threw it in a dumpster. Headed for the graveyard of broadcast equipment. Well, Craig Fox, and I love him. Craig was just a genius broadcast engineer. And Craig, I think, was electrical engineering major and also taking courses, major and stuff over at Newhouse. So Craig was there standing in the door and he said, "Yeah, Professor, I got the old equipment." And Bill Bliley came to him and said, "Hey, Craig," he saw all this equipment in the dumpster. I think they left the Dom, maybe, coming off of Mount Olympus or whatever, the phase here in Syracuse. And they saw all of this equipment in the dumpster. So Bill Bliley looks at Craig and said, "Craig, hey, man, why don't we take all this equipment out?" Craig said, "You're right. Let's set up another station." So on University Avenue, which is pretty much right across from where the Newhouse School is now,
right,
the big 3-building complex, beautiful there. And in a spot, there's a big Sheraton Hotel here on the campus there. Well, in those days, it was a 3-story wooden house there, which really was sort of into the setting for what I call the ad hoc student union building at Syracuse. So I said, Craig, Bill, show me the station. So we walked out of my office, walked across Waverly over University Ave, and walked into the student union building, which is this big 3-story wooden house. And Spectrum Records was in there, the Student Government Association offices and stuff. And we went down to the back, and it was in the basement. So we walked down in the basement, and the wonderful radio students of that era, we talked the mid-1970s, they had built a radio station. I mean, it had studios, control room, audio studios and everything in the basement. And of course, they basically commandeered the basement. And the only thing down in the basement, one of those old big gravity furnaces, the air, gravity furnaces set there with a big duct.
Which you need in Syracuse.
Yeah, which you need, yes, of course, in Syracuse. There can be a little bit of a chill in the air here, upstate New York in the wintertime. Well, anyhow, John, and to our radio, to our listeners of this show, I hope I'm not boring you all to death, but this is a true story about WJPZ. So I walked down that day, and being a radio guy, I walked in with Craig Fox and Bill Bliley, and looked at, and man, the place was neat. I mean, those days we're talking turntables, cart machines, records and stuff. I mean, it was just organized, just a beautiful look. And that day there had to have been at least maybe 12 students down there all sitting around in the station. And there was a disc jockey who I'll never forget. This was emotional for me, but it was Johnny D was his name. And Johnny D was sightless. Doing this stage in the history of Syracuse University, there were a number of young people who were sightless. And of course, they live in a world of audio. So radio, the audio is their world.
Absolutely.
And there was Johnny D on the air, man. And of course, let me explain for you radio types, audio board, I think was an old General Electric, or he was a General Electric, one of the Harris audio boards that we had from WAER, was all hooked up.
These are knobs, not sliders back at that time, right?
Yes, these were rotary knobs on the board there. The mic hanging across in front of it. And the turntables were like some turntables that came out of the Dom, out of somebody's Dom room. Had a couple of turntables there. And they had the Spotmaster cart machines, which were sitting, on a shelf they had built right on top of the audio board. In fact, I found a picture in a Syracuse yearbook. That I'm looking at the book I'm writing. I have to get copyrights on that picture and have it in a book. But it's a picture of the WJPZ studios there that day. And of course, they had, the charts on the wall about the format and all. And they're sitting around. And Johnny D was on the air. And this is the moment that I just never forget. A brand new faculty professor here at Syracuse University. Johnny D is on the air. And I mean, this kid was really sound like he was in major market New York City somewhere. And he's on the air, WJPZ 1200 T-Rock, And I said, wow. And by the way, the power output was 1/10 of a watt. Craig Fox, it was his genius engineering self. He's got an incredible way of doing an interpretation of the engineering part 73 rules, the FCC with regards to, radio stations. And he found that if you have a radio station that is operating with 1/10 of a watt or lower, it's legal to be on the air. And Craig built the transmitter. And of course, the transmitter was up on Mount Olympus with a wire hanging down the side of the dome, which really gave a signal of at least about 3 or 4 miles of the campus.
There you go. The whole thing was covered.
Yes, at 1200 on the dial. So I said, Craig, and Bill, what's the problem? They said, Professor, we can't get any professor or someone to help us here. Everybody's turned us down, and we keep getting these letters from the student affairs that we must cease and desist and get out of the basement. I said, hold it, guys. You guys need to be a student organization. I said, okay, let's settle this right there. So Bill Bliley and Craig Fox and yours truly, Professor Rick Wright, we go over to student affairs, and I walk in, introduce myself. So I'm Professor Rick Wright, new faculty member in the SI Newhouse School of Public Communication, Radio, Television, Film Department. And I'm the new advisor for the WJPZ organization. And please give me all the paperwork that is needed to basically make a student organization legal on campus. And they handed me all the documents and everything. And I never forget the day I'm sitting there, and the days of, there were no beautiful computers like you have in the year 2022, this is 1975. The key baby was the IBM Cell Electric typewriter, with the little rotary ball.
No, before my time. I hate to say it. I was born in 1980, so...
Oh, God, my God, this is 5 years before you, JG. Okay, anyhow, I sat there and I said, okay, Craig, Bill, start filling out the paperwork. Let's name it WJPZ Radio. And I say, eventually one day we'll get incorporated, but WJPZ Radio. And then, of course, you fill it out, and then I say, hey, guys, give me some names. Bill Bliley, I wrote him down as a general manager. Craig Fox, program director, chief engineer, and everything else. And then, of course, they give me some of the other students. So, name out people who would be the, operations manager. These are the announcers, the somebody handling sales. Also, another thing that with that station on the air, the students already were going out to like Fast Break, Deli, some of the joints, selling pizzas and reaching out, to the student population here in Syracuse. They were selling, on the air, get the money to make things happen. Well, anyhow, we filled out the forms, and there was a line, faculty advisor, and I signed, Professor Roosevelt, Rick Wright, Jr., Newhouse School, Public Communications, blah, 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 faculty advisor. And then I handed all the material. I think Peter was head of student affairs. And he pulled me and said, Professor, thank God for you. We didn't know what to do with the station, but now that they're a legal student organization, everything is okay. So that's the beginnings of WJPZ Radio and Professor Rick Wright, the first faculty advisor, and also really the person who just loves the station in that initial stage. When I got back here, September of 1975, as a professor of the Newhouse School of Public Communications.
So that is 47 years ago, as we record this here in October of 2022. You've had a front row seat for everything. You are the one constant in the station's history, Dr. Wright. As you think back over almost half a century, what are some of the significant moments in the station's history that stick out to you?
Oh, wow.
I know there's a lot, but if you had to pick a few.
Oh, gosh, I'm telling you. Okay, let me go. Todd Parker, God bless his soul. Todd, I lost contact with him. He's still alive in his life. But Todd Parker was on air, and another great name is Mike Roberts. In fact, Mike was out of Buffalo, New York, crazy about radio broadcasting. In fact, Mike owns a bunch of stations there down in Georgia. He went to Atlanta, V103, morning announcer years ago, and just lit Atlanta, Georgia up. Major market. Famous
urban station. We're trying to get him on the podcast as well.
Oh, you got to have Mike on. But anyhow, I'm getting back to this area. Everybody being students here at the university. Well, anyhow, one day, Todd Parker came over to my office. And he loved radio. And he came in and kind of sat there, and he was having a couple of classes. He was having some problems. I said, Todd, this is what you need to do in the class. It wasn't my class, some other professor's class. So you get out of this, man. Because in those days, everybody basically lived at the radio station. But Todd was on there and said, Professor, I don't think anybody's listening to WJPZ Radio. I said, Todd, look, whenever you're on the air behind a microphone, you'll never know who's listening.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, this is 1/10 of a watt. In fact, Craig was such a genius engineer. God knows the signal was really getting out, even after I signed off as the faculty manager of the station. When Todd Parker came in, and then a couple of days later, Todd came back to my office. And guess what Todd told me? He said, Professor Wright, you were right. That's what you mean, Todd. He said, I just got a call from Bob Carolyn. Bob Carolyn was the program director of WHEN here in Syracuse.
Mm-hmm.
And in those days, HEN was owned by Meredith Broadcasting. Eventually, Park Broadcasting bought the station. But WHEN at that time had reshuffled the deck and became really like the #1 radio station in Syracuse. And Bob Carolyn called Todd and said, hey, Todd, I've been listening to your show. I said, where? Over at WJPZ Radio. So Bob Carolyn, who was the program director, I think Bob's gone to heaven also, was there listening to JPZ Radio, trying to find part-time announcers to work at 620 WHEN here in Syracuse. And that was an incredible moment. I said, okay, this is what I'm talking about. Then, of course, what I did also, I taught a course in radio, television, announcing, and performance.
Which I took in 2001.
Oh, yes. And then the key thing about it, anybody who was working at the station, you're on air, that was a part of the class. I said, some of the lectures and stuff that we'll be doing, if you're working at the station, bring your tapes by. Let's play them to the class. And
in fact, I want to say, if memory serves, I think I was VP of Ops at the station when I took your class, and you still gave me a B, not an A.
Oh, my God, I got to change that. Oh, maybe I can.
We'll have to go back into the record.
Let's go back into the record. Okay, oh, God, everybody in the world is listening to this, huh? Well, I'm a professor emeritus now, but as far as I can say, you got an A+. I
appreciate that.
A+, John. A+, again. For the record, John, JG got an A+. Whatever I gave him back in those days, it's A+. He's become major market material, but also I think the rigor, too. Maybe I kind of give those grades, make sure you all are getting with the program.
Keeping us honest. I gotcha.
Keep you honest, you know what I mean? But of course, I knew all of you would be great, successful people in the business. And I also haven't been in the industry, knowing what you would be up against, in this industry. And of course, we got some challenges there.
I want to come back to that later on, where we are now in the industry for sure.
And we'll get to that too. But also, I'll never forget another case. The station was sounding great. In fact, Craig, with his great engineering ability, is absolutely fantastic. And we were at 1200 on the dial. And of course, here in Syracuse, at that time, there was another radio station at 1220 on the dial, WSOQ, which is broadcasting out in North Syracuse, New York. And then WNDR was at 1260. From some strange occurrence on the engineering side, everybody started saying, they raised a question. Hey, what about this new radio? Somebody call the FCC up. Let's just get down with the program. Hey, what about this new radio station that's on the air, 1200 in Syracuse? And the FCC came and said, what new radio station at 1200 on the dial? There was no, we were working with the 1/10 of a watt, the 70.73 rule. And because I think transmitter power, Craig's was pretty much at where it should be. But Craig's genius with audio modulation and amplitude modulation radio. As everybody thought it was a new station. So really what happened, the FCC showed up looking for this new radio station. And of course, they looked all over the place, couldn't find it. They ended up going up and absolutely that day did a engineering inspection of WAER radio.
Right.
And then, of course, WAER's towers up in the top of Mount Olympus, on top of the big, beautiful mountain here at Syracuse University. So they went to see the transmitter, and that's where WJPZ's transmitter was. And they said, "Oh my God, here's the transmitter."
Oops!
And it was like in a little cage, off to the side. And of course, the antenna was actually a wire, which dropped from the top right down the side of the building. We're talking the 1970s there, guys. So pretty much what had happened, we got kind of a cease and stop operating at the station. And everybody came to me and they really kind of put a lock on the station, said, hey, this station not to be operated. But thank God that in my case, I was a broadcast engineer myself, first phone broadcast engineer. And the engineering officer who was head of the FCC, for this region of New York State and all, was a friend that I knew from Norfolk, Virginia. Mr. J.J. Friedman was his name. And I called Mr. Friedman. I said, JJ. So, oh, Rick, I'm at Syracuse. Oh, man, I said, look, I'm the faculty manager advisor for the station, for the wonderful broadcast students here at Syracuse. And he said, okay, we'll take care. Don't worry. It's still legal. So, yeah, Rick, no problem. I didn't realize you were there. So get stage back on air. That was a key point.
It was a key point, and it's important to mention, too, to our listeners, though some listeners and some guests on this podcast who have received the Rick Wright Locke Scholarship Award given out at the banquet every year. For those who don't know, this is the origin of the name of that award from the lock that was put on the station, as you've told the story over the years.
Yeah, that's back in the 1970s. And some people weren't around. In fact, Todd Parker, who I just mentioned earlier, and Mike Roberts and all the guys who were around. I don't think had Mike gotten here yet from Buffalo. But anyhow, what had happened, I did get a nice caller from the FCC and I. And, of course, really being a person who worked in radio, because my hometown's in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. And station, I grew up in the Rollins Broadcast Company. They had a station in Norfolk, Virginia. Mm-hmm. WRAP, 850 on the dial, urban facility. And Ms. Leila Dyson, who was my godmother, was my mentor. But in the meantime, when I got my first phone, my first class FCC radio broadcast engineering license, which I got really out of my industrial arts electronics major at Elizabeth City State University. Mm-hmm. And I took the exam at the FCC office, federal building in Norfolk, Virginia, for my first phone. And that was God works in mysterious ways. And Mr. Friedman, who was there at that time, became the head broadcast engineer in those days, the field engineering office, which was based in Buffalo, New York. So that later years, you never know what can happen, keeping your network alive.
Don't burn those bridges. You never know who can help you down the road.
Don't burn the bridge. That's exactly. So then from that standpoint, we kept kicking. Another great moment, though, you got to realize this was WJPZ on the AM dial. And in fact, we switched frequency from 1200 to 990. Mm-hmm. And that basically got away, from we had a couple other states, like I said, WNDR was at 1260 on the dial. And then WSOQ was operating at 1220, which was a daytimer with an incredible signal. So basically moved freight from 1200 down to 990. And in fact, Craig had selected the 1200 spot because I think there were only 2 radio stations in America on 1200. I think WOAI down in San Antonio, Texas. I remember thinking back to those days. But anyway, we went to 990 on the dial. But here is another great moment. And it's really cable television. Mm-hmm. WJPZ, at that time, there were 2 cable TV systems here in upstate New York. And Syracuse did not have a cable TV franchise yet. But New Channels, which was owned by the Newhouse family, had cable franchise covering all out of the suburbs of Syracuse. Fayetteville, Manlius, out the high rent district. All right.
Yes.
So I'm also a naval officer, and I had a very dear friend of mine who was a Air Force pilot with the 174 named Joe Roden. And Joe was grounded. He had gotten the medical guys had grounded him to do ground duty. And we were very close. I went out to Hancock Field one day, I think to get something at that time. This is back in the 1980s, the early part of the 80s, or 1979 or 80s. I think it was, let me get the year. I think it was 1980 or 1981, that period, okay?
Okay.
And naval officer, I was a lieutenant commander at the time, Navy, doing a lot in the United States Navy, so I just got to Hancock Field. So one day, Joe told me, Rick, I got to go out to the runway. And he loved kids, and that day there were 4 kids who basically made the trip out to Hancock Field that Joe Roden would have them around showing them. These kids were crazy about aviation, jet planes and airplanes and aviation. So we're in this Air Force panel truck, and we drive the truck and park it right at the very end of runway 28. And what Joe had to do was looking at all the planes to make sure they had the landing gear down. And so these 4 young people, they were young, beautiful guys. I think they were probably maybe 8, 9 years old, and this calls a field trip, Mm-hmm. So all of a sudden, Joe said, this is my buddy, Rick Wright here, Professor Wright. He's also at the Newhouse School. And the kid said, hey, do you know anything about that radio station? I said, what radio station? WJPZ radio.
Ah.
I said, yeah. I said, my God, how do you guys? Oh, we listened to it on our television set. And what had happened, Mike Roberts, God, but Mike was an incredible general manager and leader too, had made a deal with new channels to broadcast WJPZ on the public access channel. You know, that they had in those days, they would have a public access channel,
right,
where they had basically local programming, but usually what they had was visuals up on the screen showing the weather, and they would have a visual of, say, Bill Rapp, Bill, who, God bless his soul, he's dead and gone. His business is still going. Automobiles, they would sell time, and you have a visual on the screen. And so the audio track was WJPZ radio.
That's interesting to me because I didn't realize. I knew that at some point the station from its AM days had gotten onto cable. I was under the impression that was on campus, but it wasn't on campus. It was in the suburbs.
Oh, yes, the suburbs. So all the kids out there in the high-rent district of, why don't I call this the high-rent district? Well,
anybody who knows the market knows why you're calling it the high-rent district.
Okay. Well, these are wonderful kids there. They all, they got nice TVs, nice homes out there in the suburbs, and they all listen to WJPZ radio. Now, in the meantime, there were other urban stations, not urban, we didn't have a full-time urban station, other top 40 CHR stations in town. There was WNDR, and of course, WFBL, WOLF was really kind of the job, but AM radio was kind of finding, had to redefined itself in it because FM was going to come about. But no, it was on new channels to our great WJPZ family. And Mike Roberts was the general manager at the time who put that deal together. So all these kids out in the suburbs are listening to WJPZ radio and not the other WOLFs at all. They were listening to Wolf and all, but WJPZ. And of course, then the station always had, even in those days, had a professional sound.
Always.
Also, John, I get back again and to get to this point, Craig and Bill Blowley's original objectives for the station was to put together a training ground, a training ground for working in really radio broadcasting, the professional sound of radio. The big formats then were, of course, contemporary hit radio, top 40, urban contemporary was big, country was big, and of course some of the old line stations, which were like WSYR at the time, were adult, what they call a middle of the road station. But the young people were into CHR, top 40.
Sure.
And those were the jobs were, all over the country. So the key was to put together a professional sounding CHR radio station for training,
which has stayed the course of time over 50 years.
Yes.
So after we go on cable, we've now moved on the AM dial. In the mid-'80s, we move over to FM, which is a certain big deal in the history of the station.
Well, here's a story on this. Okay, WAER radio was completely student-run and operated, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And then politics surfaced on the campus. Really, it's all about money. And WAER was in the Newhouse building and was part of the Newhouse School of Public Communications then, completely student-run and operated. And at the time, let me just give it out. Okay, I'm late years here. Let me give you the real story. The lab fee money that students were paying, a part of their tuition, went into the Newhouse School's coffers for, supporting WAER radio. And, the audio labs and TV studios and everything.
Yeah.
And really what had happened was the Newhouse School was reorganized at that time into 3 divisions. Dean Hank Schulte, in his last years as dean, reorganized the school into 3 divisions. One division was under Professor Cleve Matthews, the journalism, print side of the business. And then Professor Ed Stevens, who had come here as an advertising guy out of Chicago, became the associate dean, that is, for the intermediate area, which is magazine, advertising, public relations, and all. And then we brought another person in by the name of Dr. David Berkman, who came in from Washington, D.C. to be the head of really what they call, in those days, they changed the name to telecommunications, which was really television radio cell.
Yeah.
So we had these 3 divisions. Mm-hmm. Now, in the interview session with Dr. Berkman, who came up from Washington, D.C., the question was on the table about WAER radio. What would you do with WAER? And he said, "Oh man, you guys should make it a public radio station, basically affiliated with National Public Radio and the Corporation of Public Broadcast, CPB."
Yep.
And said, with a professional staff, you can, there's monies that would come that way, would be a good way to support WAER radio. Well, that also really basically took control of the stations from the students to make this happen. And at that time, WAER radio was way ahead of its time. Its programming was incredible. I mean, news, they had an all-night urban show, 360 Ebony Degrees, Butch Charles, Kenny D's, and all those good guys. Incredible show, man. So basically, to make the long story short, the students lost control of WAER radio when they made that move in the early 1980s. Mm-hmm. It was really I was sad because I said, this is not the way to go. But anyhow, what happened was the students they were protests, whole kind of goodies here. And I hope Sean McDonough is listening to this, because Sean, I'm going to give you your props. He was a big leader in trying to maintain the leadership of the station as, student run and operated. Well, anyway, they went the other route. And basically what happened, the students, and of course, Student Government Association was also putting money into WAER radio along with the lab fee, to basically support the station financially.
Sure.
Which is, a non-commercial radio station. Of course, the station was to train students in the art and science of radio broadcasting and all of its various ancillary elements. Well, anyhow, the Student Government Association were furious. Students were up in an uproar. And so WAER basically goes in that direction. There was WJPZ radio. I had a course, I was teaching a class in the Newhouse School, radio management, a management course, mm-hmm. which dealt with really the whole business of how to buy radio stations, how to develop radio stations, what you got them, how to program them, all the components of running a radio station, and really from the standpoint of a major market scenario. And then Mark Humble, Mark was the chief engineer of WAER radio, myself, being a broadcaster. We were always talking about the spectrum here in Syracuse. Well, P.V. Moore High School up in Central Square was way ahead of its time. They had a 10-watt FM radio station. And they went on air like in the 1960s. And here's a very rural community in upstate New York. P.V. Moore High School had a radio station, man. But really, I think they had a foresight, really a way ahead of his time science professor there who put the station on the air. And I think after this professor died or either retired, I never had a chance to have met him. I got to do some research and find out who he is to be in this book that I'm writing. Well, anyhow, what happened, the folk up there didn't know what to do with the radio station. So they turned the license back in. And basically, when they turned the license back in, we looked at did a frequency search here, did some mathematical, engineering calculations, and said, my God, we could put a new FMer on air, not with a lot of power though, but run 100 watts, 200 watts at 89.1 megahertz, mm-hmm. which was right between WAER at 88.3. And then of course, WRVO, Oswego State's radio station, was there. And this is going to be another topic, but we won't get into this. This is a long story on this one. Well, anyhow, what happens in my radio broadcast management course in the Newhouse School of that era, this is the early 80s, and the students I had in, and boy, every time I think of Dave Gorab, or Dave's doing great. I'm just thinking of names here. I'm having a senior moment.
Most of whom I'm trying to get on the podcast, Dr.
I'm having a senior moment here to the WJPZ family.
Okay, let me stop you there for a second, because you mentioned WRVO in Oswego.
Yes.
And his name is escaping me, but who was the crusty old professor?
Oh, Professor, and I love it. He was here, Professor Dr. John Oldfield, and he is...
Oldfield, yes.
Yeah, he's dead and gone. He really...
if memory serves, he would write complaints to the FCC about JPZ and basically tried to get us thrown off because we were interfering with RVO up in Oswego.
Yes, and RVO, of course, was in Oswego. Eventually, they put another translator that's on air right to this very day to straighten that problem out. But getting back to the WJPZ-FM story, basically in my class and the students, I always had my class always loaded with students, especially the radio people.
Oh, yeah.
And of course, I came to class that day and I said, hey, you know what? With all the stuff that's going on right now, why don't we look at putting WJPZ radio on the FM dial? And I kind of talked to him about engineering and spectrum allocations and all. and indicating that Mark, who was the chief engineer at that time at WAER, like Mark left here, became the head of broadcast engineering at Temple University in New York, not New York, Temple in Philadelphia, Broad Street there. So anyhow, we looked at it and I said, hey, let's do this. Let this class, let's rewrite the syllabus. And what we're going to do is put WJPZ radio on FM. And let's use this class as our laboratory to learn how to put a brand new radio station on the air from ground level up.
And there weren't a lot of stations on FM at that point in the mid-'80s, right?
Not really, because, in fact, a lot of the FM stations weren't doing anything pretty much here in Syracuse. What I'm getting at is eventually WOUR, for instance, out of Ithaca, Utica, was a powerhouse FM that was coming along, and it was creating some nice havoc. Then WSOQ had an FM that came on the air, and eventually it changed its format. But then there was another 104.7, which is their B104 country station in Syracuse, became an automated top 40 station on FM. And a great guy, John Carucci, who's still alive and here in Syracuse on air. Magic 104.7. But, the FM story was getting ready to happen. But, of course, WJPZ was a big part of that here in Syracuse. And, of course, the FCC application form, which, statement of ownership. I taught the students all about the ownership side. We had to basically put together a corporation, and it is now WJPZ Radio Incorporated.
Just as you said it would 10 years prior.
Okay, and that's what we did. Then, of course, we set the class up to different groups to work on the programming format that section had to be filled out with the application. Then, of course, the engineering section, there's Craig Fox and all the other good folk in town to get the engineering part done. And then, of course, there's a financial section that we had to put together indicating, the money we were going to have available and all. And then the Student Government Association that was really furious at that time over what had happened in WAER basically came up with the money to give us the good seed money to get going, to get the equipment bought, get the license application in. And then, of course, I never forget one day the students came to me one day and said, Professor, we need another piece from you. I said, what? Due to the fact that we as students, we keep coming and going, the FCC needed to have someone who would be here to be stable. I said, no problem. I'm the faculty, advisor. And wrote a letter that went into the file that I would be here at the university and standing by as a faculty advisor, mentor, consultant with all the students, to maintain WJPZ radio. And so, wow, we got the license. 100 watts at 89.1, transmitter on the top of Day Hall, Mount Olympus. And we went on the air, and there's a fascinating photograph of Mary, Mary, Mary Mancini.
Yes.
In that daily orange, turning on the switch for WJPZ FM. And the rest is history. And of course, at that time, we were down in Watson.
Yep.
Is where the studios were, because we had moved the studios, the WJPZ studios, when we had the FM, the AM station with Mike and everybody was we had moved out of the basement, by the way, the basement here in Syracuse, worked with the ad hoc student union building to the top floor. I think we were up in the attic, I believe.
From the basement to the attic, moving on up in the world.
To the attic. Yeah. And then, of course, when the FM scenario, we had to get a new studio complex. And of course, we were able to get right next to the old Good Food store, which was there in Watson.
I remember that. That was where we were until the studio got rebuilt again, and we were in the house on Ostrom Ave.
Yes, because one of our big alums came down with big money to renovate Watson into a student media center, because we had UUTV, which is now Citrus TV.
They've renamed it so many times.
Yeah, Citrus, beautiful facility. Then, of course, the Good Food store moved out, and I said, oh, my God, we need more space. And I got to Chancellor Cantor and all that time and said, got a radio station. Oh, no problem. So then we got money came in, and then we got one of the best radio broadcast facilities, I think, in the country, just as good as anybody, WJPZ, in the student, it's a Mitchell Student Media Center, which is Watson, that whole bottom floor.
Dr. Wright, I want to ask you, because we're going kind of chronologically here. This is not something that comes up often when you've told the story of JPZ, but we've gotten to the mid-'80s now. We're on FM. A few years after that, a moment that was infamous and unfortunately very well remembered in JPZ history and SU history, and that's Pan Am 103.
Oh, yes.
What do you remember about that and the station?
Boy, I tell you, that was a sad day. I was in my office. We're talking Christmas of 1988. I'm in my office at the Newhouse School checking papers.
Yeah.
And I'm there. Christmas is coming up. The students had left the campus. I mean, everybody had gone, going, leaving the campus to go home. And I was in my office that day, and I always had television sets, radios on, and I had my TV on, and the building was quiet. I mean, really quiet that day. And I was there, and all of a sudden, Tom Brokaw showed up on the TV screen. I was watching I had NBC, Channel 3 here in Syracuse, and he said a plane crash had happened on a flight from London to New York City, and we're trying to get the details on it. I said to myself, hold it, plane from London to New York? And I said, oh my God, we got a lot of students over there in the radio, television, film semester in London. And I said, hope nobody's known that flight.
You had that gut feeling.
I had an eerie feeling, John, and to the JPZ family, boy, I tell you, and the building was quiet. I mean, there were no more, the semester was over and Christmas was coming up. And so I'm there, and within about another half hour, Brokaw comes on the air again and said that a Pan Am flight out of 103, out of London, headed for New York City, had exploded and crashed over a place called Lockerbie, Scotland. And I said, oh my God, what? And I was thinking again about the students, who were coming back home. And then Dr. Joan Depper, Joan died this past year. Dr. Joan Depper, who wrote a book on this, by the way, she was in her office, and I went down and I said, Joan, I just got on TV that a Pan Am flight from London headed to New York City has crashed over in Scotland. And I think I went to Dr. Myers, and Dr. Myers kind of looked, I found out he was in his office. He said, my God, that plane was kind of off course, wasn't it? I said, I don't know, but I don't feel right about this. And sure enough, later that evening, come to find out that the students that I thought that I was thinking about were on that flight.
Yeah.
And one of the students was a WJPZer.
Steve Burrell.
Yes, Rusty Bailiff Burrell, his brother, Steve, was on that flight. And I tell you, I just broke down and cried in my office that day, Jay.
Yeah.
And it was Christmas time coming up. Then I called my father. My mother had died in 1979 in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, at Christmas time. And this is about a decade later. And I called my dad, said, Dad, I'm coming home. I hadn't planned to come home for Christmas. I was going to stay in Syracuse. And then I went home and just packed up some clothes, threw them in a car, and just jumped in my car and drove all the way down through the night back home to Elizabeth City, North Carolina. So I got home and I said, Dad, a bunch of students of mine got killed on that flight.
Yeah.
And it was a big story here in America. So I went up that day, went to sleep that night, and my father came into my bedroom that I grew up in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, and he shook me and said, Sonny, I said, my nickname was Sonny. That was the name my mother gave me. And that's a new name you JPZ don't know about, Dr. Rick. Well, anyhow, he said, look, you got a phone. I got someone on the phone wants to talk to you. I said, okay, Dad, it's time to go to work. That's what Dad told me. Mm-hmm. Picked up the phone. My father had called the local radio station at WGAI in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, my hometown radio station. And the announcer on the air said, Professor Wright, God knows you were from Elizabeth City at Syracuse. I said, yes. I said, did you know anything? I said, yes, some of my students got killed on the plane. And he said, look, can we interview you on the air? So I went on the air at WGAI, Elizabeth City, North Carolina, that Christmas, that year. And I told them all about the students, in the Newhouse School, students I were teaching and all. But when I heard that Steve Burrell got killed, that was Rusty's brother.
Yeah.
Yeah, Rusty. In fact, when I was doing my doctoral dissertation here at Syracuse, I did a study on the use of radio as a tool of instruction that could use to teach kids. A comparison of the effectiveness of 3 selected radio broadcast formats containing brief instructional messages was the title of my doctoral dissertation. And I used 3 formats, AOR, CHR, and Urban Contemporary, that I basically played for 3 middle schools here in Syracuse, Grant, Levy, and Shea. But the point I'm making is that the contemporary hit radio broadcast format that I use in my study with 6 historical stories about Syracuse, New York, was done by Rusty the Bailiff Burrell. And in fact, at our last WJPZ alumni family get-together this past spring, we finally got together, out of COVID. I told Rusty, I brought my dissertation, and the great Scotty McFarland, oh my God, boy, you all have made me proud. Scotty is there, the
congressional correspondent for CBS News, and I've already got my podcast interview recorded with him.
Oh man, major, I always talk about major market, in my classes here at Syracuse, getting you all ready for, the biggest and best broadcast facilities in the country. And some weekends when I'm watching sports, and there are at least 4 or 5 students that I've taught, doing play-by-play sports, the biggest doggone events in the country. Looking at Mike Tirico tonight, NBC, Sunday Night Football, Sean McDonough, Iron Eagle, oh God, Adam Shine, oh God, and listen, man.
All these guys.
All my guys.
That transitions me actually into a story I want to ask you to tell, because I had mentioned this to another alum, and they said, I don't know this story. I said, how do you not know this story? Remind me what happened, the Larry King story, on air with Larry King.
Oh, yes. Mike Tirico and the crew from WAER were going down to cover the Georgetown Syracuse basketball game.
Right.
And I told Mike and the guys, I said, guys, when you get down to Washington, man, you guys should go over to Mutual Broadcasting Company and meet Larry King. Larry King at that time had an all-night talk show, and that baby was on. In fact, he resurrected the Mutual Broadcasting System with its all-night talk show for stuff with 12 midnight to like 6, 5 in the morning. And Larry King had the long-form interviews. I mean, he had all the top movie stars, presidents and all. And I told Mike, guys, go over and meet Larry King, after y'all do the game. So they had already, I did a big Georgetown Syracuse basketball game, which in those days, man, Georgetown, Syracuse. Wow, what a war. What some incredible stories we can tell you about that series.
It's a whole other podcast, but you're absolutely right.
But anyhow, so they go over to Mutual and, telephone there, from Syracuse University, the Newhouse School of Broadcast, sportscasters, and like they meet Mr. Larry King. So they go up in the studio, and they're sitting, and Larry King is on the air. Mike and the guys are sitting there. I think I was looking into the studio at Mutual, which is over what's that, Robert E. Lee? What's the name of the highway over in Arlington? It's where Mutual had their studios in those days. Mm-hmm. Well, anyhow, they were there, and they were sitting around, and then I think Larry King had finished up that first hour, and Mike and the guys were just sitting there. Nobody really came out, and they were listening to Larry King's show. So Larry King is ending up that hour with somebody he had on the phone, maybe a former, President Jimmy Carter or somebody. And then he says on the air, he said, okay, in the next hour, we're going to find out what it takes to become a broadcaster, a sportscaster. And I got students here from Syracuse University, the Newhouse School, and Mike and them looked and they'll be up next. And so they all go into the studio, and Larry King interviews Mike Tirico and all of the WAER sports crew. And I'm home, and I'm here in Syracuse. I'm living out in Liverpool, listening to the show. I said, oh my God, they got there. And Larry King was interviewing them. And then Larry King always had one statement that is to the broadcast industry. If you're looking for the next major sportscaster, all you got to do is call up the Syracuse, New York, the Newhouse School, and ask for Professor Rick Wright and ask him who's next and who's ready. But anyhow, then after they had did the interview, I think they were on the air with an hour. I called the show up, and Larry King comes up, Syracuse, New York. I said, Mr. King, hi, I'm Professor Rick Wright of the Newhouse School. He said, oh my God, Professor, you're doing a great. I said, those are my students. And I said, thank you so much for interviewing my students on your radio show. And that was the story that night. Yes.
That is
worldwide. Well, I don't know. I just, my way as a professor, I love the industry. My life has been basically the professional world of broadcasting. I got started when I was 15 years old. My father was an electrician and a motion picture projectionist. for a company called the Virginia Carolina Amusement Company down in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. They own all the theaters in northeastern North Carolina, a bunch of theaters all around Norfolk, Virginia. So I was an audiovisual geek. So I really, love the industry and worked a lot of radio stations, and I've taught in 5 universities, 40 at Syracuse, and of course also naval officer, retired captain there. But I just love people. I love the industry, and I love teaching. And I think, John, the greatest thing you've done, even on this day of being on this wonderful by the way, podcasting or podcasts are really the children of radio broadcasting.
Absolutely.
And I just want to make that statement, which I love. But this is just a wonderful moment for me.
I don't want to let you go yet unless you have unless you have a hard stop. I got a couple other things to ask you about here, Professor.
No, I don't have a hard stop. I'm here at Byrd Library, 5th floor on the campus of Syracuse University. The sun is shining outside, and this is a moment that'll go down in my book in history itself, having this wonderful opportunity to talk about WJPZ Radio.
Well, I just appreciate you sharing these stories with us so that we have a place to keep them all, because those of us have heard the stories and passed the stories down, but to hear them straight from you, and we're kind of going chronologically here through the station, and we're into the 90s now, I would say. These are the flamethrower days of the Hal Rood and Scott Meach and all those guys from the early 90s, many of which we're going to have on the podcast. That's when the station really hit its stride and was going toe-to-toe with 93Q. Those were some times, too.
Oh, 93Q. Oh, my God. Oh, God, I have the senior moment of what's his name? Bill McMartin. Was it his name? General manager of 93Q, the 100,000 watter here in Syracuse. Okay, here's what the true story, folks. In fact, every Monday morning when I got into my office at the Newhouse School here in Syracuse, Bill McMartin, yes, the general manager and vice president of 93Q, would be calling me on the telephone. And JG, John, what was he asking? What did he tell me? Can you get an idea?
I'm guessing he's saying, what are these kids doing? They're taking money out of my pocket.
Yes, that's exactly what he was basically saying. He was saying, hey, Rick, I heard you got this radio station, man. These college kids, they're sounding too professional, he told me. He said, the station sounds too good. I said, well, Bill, I'm training. This is what they're supposed to. They're college students, man. And he was complaining every week. I got a phone call about I gotta cut back on this WJPZ. I said, but no, it's competition. I said, and then I told one day, I said, Bill, you mean to tell me you got a 100,000 watt FMer, 93 power? Only 200 kilowatters in Syracuse, WSYR, which is now Y94, and NTQ, which is 93Q.
Right.
You only 200,000 watts. I said, Bill, you got an effort with a 100,000 watt signal. And you mean tell me that some college students at Syracuse University with a 100 watt non-commercial FM station is kicking? Oh, I didn't know I shut up. I said, Bill, hey. And I said, by the way, you should hire the WJPZ staff if you're having a problem. because really at that time, because Birch and Arbitron were the 2 rating services.
Yep.
And the Birch system used a telephone, I think, which was a greater data sampling process than the diary system that Arbitron used. And Birch, they simply call up on the telephone to a demographic category and say, hey, what's your favorite radio station?
Right.
And I think they were calling up, 12 plus demo, like 12 to 20 years old around Syracuse. And they came in, and WJPZ was number 1 in the city, number 1 in Birch ratings. Big numbers and long time, time spent listening numbers and everything. By the way, what I'm indicating is WJPZ was just working havoc on 93Q and their 100,000 watts here in Syracuse.
So that was the early 90s. And then as we get into the later 90s, folks like Harry Waring, Dina Jacoby, they helped shepherd the station through some very difficult times with receivership and some really tough moments for the station was in jeopardy.
Some tough moments too. Yeah, also, oh my God, I having a senior moment. He'll kill me. Oh God, Scott Taylor, Scott, I love you. Scott became a big superstar with all the big broadcasters. Scott was a money guy, is what I'm getting at.
Mm-hmm.
And the station in those real heydays, the summertime in Syracuse, WJPZ had a thing called the WJPZ Z89 Days of Summer, 89 Days of Summer.
Yep.
Which would end up at the Great New York State Fair. And they would give away a car. I mean, a brand new car. And they had, of course, we had the rules for non-commercial broadcast have been kind of relaxed on the sponsorship side. So you really could, you could really have some advertisers is what I'm getting. That's what is also happening in non-commercial broadcasting to this very day. A new way of well, you really can't have the real spots of it's the greatest thing in the world, blah, blah, blah. But you can say this hour has been brought to you by blah, blah, blah. Well, there was an automobile dealership out in Auburn. I think Scott and the guys had made a deal with, and they say, look, we'll give you a car to give away. And Z, in the summertime, man, you ride all over the town, go to the beaches out at, oh my God, Sylvan Beach, you name it, WJPZ, all on the air, blasting. And the 89 Days of Summer, they had a big contest given away that this car would be given away on Labor Day. So those kind of deals go. Well, what I'm mentioning, Scott, Scott's leadership, the station really as a beautiful, incredible radio broadcast laboratory, it was making money. And there was quite a bit of money in the bank. I could give you the figure, but it was a lot, okay? Yeah. Of money in the bank for WJPZ. And then eventually, student management comes and goes. And then the management came along, saw all that money. They wanted to change the format to a whole nother format that didn't really work, but we could get it. But let me get back to this receivership side. Mm-hmm. Basically, what happened there, God knows that I tried to pull everybody together. There were students who basically felt they were being shut out of WJPZ, within this leadership and having an offer and a chance to learn the business. And I think at the time, I had real mixed emotions about how did I handle that situation in those days.
Really?
And yes, I do. And I think I could have stepped up, kind of avoided this, but I was trying to appease some folk, it was my baby too. And didn't want to, well, anyhow, what had happened was technically, we had some students who basically went through student affairs and all, and basically, pretty much what you call would say, sue the station. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, the student organizational side of the deal, not the radio side, was basically station went into a receivership, is what I'm getting at.
That was about the time when I got there. I got there in the fall of '98. Yes. So that was rough wrapping up then. I want to switch gears here because...
But, I will say this, though. Uh-huh. I got a phone call from Chancellor Shaw's wife. Mm-hmm. Chancellor Shaw, Miss Mary Shaw, love her. She called me and said, Professor Wright, don't get too involved. You're the faculty advisor for WJPZ. But I never forget, she told me something. She said, just back off. She said, this is a learning experience going on. And you just stand by and make the adjustments as you see. But everything's going to be okay. I said, yes, it will be. Mrs. Shaw, the chancellor's wife, called me on the phone. And I never forget, then I met her one day on Marshall Street. She said, no, the students have to work this out themselves. It's a learning experience because they got to run into the same identical kind of situation, especially the management students, once they get into the industry itself.
That's a really interesting perspective.
Yeah. So she was telling us a teaching moment. And she said, no, it's going to, the students will come and go here at the university. And that's what the Chancellor Shaw's wife told me, said. She looked at me and held my hand and said, it's a learning environment. Let me just give you from another perspective. That's what we are here as a university to teach and get our alums out of here to be able to handle life's problems and handle those kind of challenges. So that moment, as I look at it now, as I've gotten older, it was a great teachable moment.
There you go.
And a lot of the people who were involved in it, I think that particular scenario that happened with the station went into a level of receivership. That was through student affairs, by the way. The license was okay, what I'm getting from that standpoint. The point I make is a teachable moment. And a lot of our people in that era have ended up in some of the biggest leadership roles, in the broadcast industry today. So as I look at it now, the big picture and how I handle that, success was on the table. Everybody learned, about what needs to be done.
A couple years later, another learning situation near and dear to my heart. So it would have been 2000, 2001.
Yes.
When they were rebuilding the station. We referenced this earlier. And we were moved into a house off campus over on Ostrom. And we had to jury rig that thing together. We had John Farrakani and Rob Crandall and Stephen Kurtz and so many others where you would lose the station under a bridge like AM at one point. There was a mysterious tone at the top of the hour.
Yes.
What do you remember about the house on Ostrom?
I loved it. In fact, I got to a point because the house gave WJPZ its biggest facility ever. We had the whole house.
That's an interesting way to look at it.
I tell you what, really, from the standpoint of being the advisor for the station, I got over and saw this house. I said, my God, I was thinking about the basement, then the third floor, the attic, the days of Mike Roberts. And then I would move over to Watson. And the reason was that Watson was being renovated into a brand new student media center.
Right.
And we had to move to the house. And in fact, I never get, it's like designing construction. They called me and they said, Professor, we'll give WJPZ a whole house. And we got in there and had space galore. And then all of a sudden I got thinking, I said, man, we should stay here, but, get some money to really fix the house up. But of course, the university had other plans in it. All those houses got torn down. That was a big picture.
As the VP of operations that year in the house, I'm glad to say we got out of the house and got to a new state-of-the-art studio. I hope I don't embarrass you here, but there was
you never can embarrass me.
Okay, good.
Never,
you may change your mind in a second here.
No, I won't change my mind.
We had Peterman and Marty D on the morning show in that house, and they did a bit with you on a walkie-talkie, walking through the house live on the air, describing the house over the air. And I'm pretty sure, if memory serves, live on the air, you said, "Oh, well, that's a used condom. Let's get away from that."
You're right.
Do you remember that?
I've forgotten all about that, Peter, but I loved it. Oh, God, yes. Oh, no embarrassments in radio, man. I mean, my God, for that era. Oh, okay. Yes. We were describing the facility itself. But also, I tell you, I'll indicate again, we had the facility in the house. It was on Ostrom Avenue, wasn't it? Yeah. In fact, I really thought, when I walked over, because having seen the station from that famous knock on the door in 1975 when Craig and Bill came to my office, and I first saw the facility down in the basement of the big house, which was really the ad hoc student union building in Syracuse at that time, right where the Sheraton Hotel sits there.
Yep.
Remember that very first site. Now I'm looking at the station there in this house with all this space, had a balcony, a porch you could look out. And of course, still, you guys got to realize I'm a poor little guy who grew up in North Carolina, man, and coming to Syracuse, man, and I worked a lot of stations that were not dumps, but I was in a radio station, man. It's people are not worried about what it looks like. It's a jock on the air, hopefully got equipped to get the signal out. Then I worked facilities. I never forget, we built the brand new studios in Norfolk, Virginia, downtown Plaza Shopping Center studios for WRAP back in the 1960s. And it was in a shopping center, man. And people could come by and see the jocks on the air, all the beautiful furniture, had a brand new Gates board, the new transistor ones that they had just come out with. Fantastic facility. But again, I think I was looking at the space side of it, John, all the space that we had. But of course, they were going to tear the house. The house has been torn down there. But again, renovations was taking place to what? Watson,
And everything that came from there. So a few years later, we are, and I'm not sure how much of the story you know, so I want to give you my side of it, and I want to get your side of it.
Okay.
So if I said the phrase Rick Wright radio bingo, would that mean anything to you?
Oh, God, yes.
Okay, so before I hear your side of it, I want to give you the other side of it. So this is, it was either homecoming or fall conference in 2003. Several of us are sitting around having beers at Fagan's, and we're trying to come up with fundraising ideas for the banquet. And we think about the great story of the history of the station that you would tell every year. And there are several of us there, and we came up with the idea of a bingo game. And we put a number of key phrases and names and call letters that you would tell in the story on a bunch of bingo cards.
Yes.
And instead of BINGO, it was RADIO across the top. And it became this great fundraiser. It was a 50-50, and if you got not bingo, but radio, you had to jump up and yell radio in the middle of the speech, and you got half the pot, and it ended up being a great fundraiser. But I feel like after a few years of this, after trying to get one over on the old professor, that you figured it out. And at that point, you would just mess with us and just throw out random call letters and random stations and random things that you never even mentioned in the story before just to mess with us and have fun with the game. Tell me, is that accurate?
Accurate. I did not know. Here, let's get it. It took me about 3 years, though, before I figured out what the hell was happening. Because, the bottom line is that this is our annual WJPZ alumni get-together that we have. In fact, I've always been just amazed at how all of you come back in the wintertime. Of course, in Syracuse, the end of February and around
yes.
March, the
Tells
winter
you how much we love this place.
Winter's still kicking, and y'all have come in snowstorms and everything.
And somebody invariably gets snowed in and misses their flight back the next day.
And they are just, calling. I'm trying to get there, Professor. Hey, Matt Friedman out of Detroit, the Big 8 CKLW. Matt Friedman called me one day. Said, Matt, I'm at the airport, Professor. I'm going to get there. No, don't worry. Tell everybody I'm on my way. Snowstorms so hit Syracuse.
And I'm here in Detroit with Matt, and he tried to fly out that year and didn't make it. He got delayed, canceled because we had a snowstorm here. And I drove out the day before, and I made it because I got there ahead of the snow.
Oh, God. Well, getting back to Rick Wright bingo. All right. I usually show up about an hour or so, just see everybody. And I'm walking around the hotel. We normally have this, folks. By the way, folks, we had the big banquets at the Sheraton, in the very spot where the station was founded. I mean, when it was in the old house. So I'm walking around and, boy, meeting everybody. And, my God, hey, Dion who's there. Dion is running all the urban programming over at Sirius XM Satellite Radio.
Another future podcast guest.
Yes, Mary Mancini over there. Tina, all our family, just incredible. So everybody's around, and y'all got the big table set up where you check in, get your name tags and everything. And then I'm seeing some students over there pulling out money. You all coming back, Matt, always coming with a whole fistful of $100 bills and stuff. And y'all are buying tickets over there, whatever. I noticed this. So that's the first year. And then I would start, y'all would bring me up on the stage. And God, I thought y'all were just tired of this old professor giving y'all this story. But of course, we got new people coming in every year. So I'm trying to, keep the historical timeline passed down to the next generation of broadcasters.
That's what we're doing today.
And so I'm there giving a story. I started talking about my world of radio broadcasting. And I tell the story when I was a little high school kid, I wanted to meet this new disc jockey named Frankie Drake. And Frankie was on a station WCNC in Elizabeth City, North Carolina. And I said, when I want to go out to the radio station, this is the moment that got me for radio. I rode my bicycle out down this dirt road with pine trees on both sides, dusty road. And I pull up, there's the building, WCNC. And there's a MG sports car parked there in front. And I knocked on the door and I thought I was getting run away. And a guy comes to the door and he looks at me and he said, "Hey, you like radio, don't you?" I said, "Yes, sir. Come on in." And the thing about it, this guy had a show called The Night Train, Frankie Drake. He was on every night at 8 o'clock. And his show was aimed at high school kids, and high school students were writing letters to Frankie about, their girlfriend or their, he would read the letters out of there. And this goes out to John. John, your girlfriend, Luana called in and said, she wrote me a letter and said she loves you, but you won't pay any attention in the hallway of the high school. This stuff like that.
Yeah.
So I get there and I'm in the studio. And then Frankie Drake, Mutual Network was on. And I think Gabriel Heather was on the air, one of the network of news shows. And the break, and he looked at me, "Come on in." I'm in the control room, one of those old Collins boards with a transmitter behind with the glass. I'm seeing the modulation meter bouncing back and forth. Man, I was in heaven. So then he comes on, and this kind of shows I would tell you guys. And I would say, then Frankie would hit the mic, and I would, look at it, boy, and he would say, "This is WCNC, Elizabeth City, North Carolina. I'm Frankie Drake. Check me out tonight at 8 with The Night Train. Oh, by the way, they got a young man in the stage from P.W. Moore High School, Sonny Wright, man, he's here." Boy, I was, the headphones in the studio, that did it. And then somebody in the audience, that is at our banquet, would holler, "Bingo!" I got it.
Not bingo, radio.
No, he was like, "Radio." Yeah, that's it, radio. And I said, hey, what's happening here? So, so then next year, same thing. I started giving all these stories about growing up in radio broadcasting. WLLE Raleigh, WANT Richmond, WRAP Norfolk, okay, WTNJ Trenton, New Jersey, WANN Annapolis, Maryland, with the Hoppy Adams. Okay, I get it. Then Thomas Hollis Radio. Another year goes by. And then I said, had the game. Yeah, Rick Wright bingo. And man, I'm telling, here's an old professor, I've been kind of faking it, John. You guys thought I was brilliant, I'm really a humble and shy guy. You can't believe it.
You're about as shy as you are. Not brilliant. No, you're great.
So anyhow, I think about the third year of you all doing a Rick Wright bingo at the WJPZ, alum thing. Place is packed. Everybody's having some nice drinks and everything, and everybody's there looking nice. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, the WJPZ alumni is probably the greatest and largest and probably the most fantastic group of radio broadcast students in the country.
Agreed.
Right here at Syracuse University. I mean, our alums are just leaders in the industry in all kind of areas. And I'm just, so that's the audience. So then I said, oh my God, I see what's happening here. Because y'all would win what was it? You put the money in, y'all got 50% of what?
Yeah, it was a 50-50. So
50-50.
Everybody would buy tickets for, I think, $25, and then half would go to the station and the Alumni Association, and the other half would go to whoever got radio first.
And I said, oh, wow. Then I finally got what was happening.
And then you started messing with us because you would throw out stuff that wasn't on anybody's card because it was stories you'd never told before.
Well, also the next thing about it, I think what really helped me finally was that I came early and I saw these cards and y'all.
Oh, you saw the cards.
I said, that's what, but look, it didn't happen. It happened like 3 years later. Okay. I mean, 3 years have gone by and the game was getting bigger and bigger than ever. And then all of a sudden I was noticed, I got there early and you all were, handing the money over to the table, the big table with all the name tags on it, the WJPZ banner. Then you all were coming back with all this paraphernalia from radio stations all over the country that y'all were to give away stuff, whatever. And I thought that was it. But then I saw these cards, bingo cards. And then I realized that everybody, when I was giving the story of WJPZ and the story of Rick Wright all through the night. Radio, that was what was happening. And I said, oh my God, Rick, you got to do you got to approach this thing differently, man. Eventually someone's going to get it, but you got to go into your bag of radio stories and pull out some stories that they don't even know about. And man, I tell you, I got a lot of radio stories. Really, I'm telling you. And that's the reason the book I'm writing now, I turned up the radio because there's some great announcements. I think I was in Annapolis, Maryland this summer. I'm on the board of directors of the National Naval Officers Association. I'm the historian, and we represent Navy, Marine Corps, and Coast Guard officers all over the world. Mm-hmm. And I was at Annapolis this summer. In fact, my birthday was 24th July. I went down on the train to Baltimore, and Admiral Sinclair Harris, our president, picked me up, checked into the Westin big 5-star hotel in Annapolis. And then I was thinking about my old buddy, Hoppy Adams, who was a great disc jockey at WANN Annapolis, Maryland, 1190 on the dial. This is an urban station with 10,000 watts. In fact, they eventually went to 50,000 watts. And they had a big beach on the Chesapeake Bay. And especially back in the days when the South was segregated, it's basically a station aimed at our urban audiences, African-American audiences.
Sure.
And they used to pack in like 40,000 people at Carr's Beach, broadcasting live over WANN Annapolis, Maryland. Hoppy died, of course, a number of years ago. Another guy that story, I don't think I ever told you about that story, but I would come up with a story like that I know I never told you before. And I'm playing with y'all. Then I finally would say, okay, let somebody win this bingo game.
But you just, the perfect choice of words. You were playing with us because we thought we'd get one over on you. And we might have for a year or two, but then you had the last laugh in the end.
Oh, yeah. And then finally I realized what was happening. And so thank God I had a bunch of other radio stories. In fact, a lot of stories. I'm trying to forget all these stories in this book that I'm working on right there at Bird Library. But yes, and that was it. I said, let me work with him. Then let me be the radio professor there, the historian of radio. Let me come up with some radio stories that they do not know about, or either they might know about if they're really genius scholars like they are. But that was it. Yes, the Rick Wright bingo game.
Proving once and for all that you were the professor and we were the students.
Yes.
A couple things I want to ask you about as we start to wrap up here, Dr. Wright. So the first is 50 years as Z89, WJPZ, in all the different formats, and you've seen it all. What is your biggest takeaway of the radio station half a century later?
I tell you what, the radio station is still kicking. And in fact, I'm an old dad. I got to bring up my son's name, Roosevelt Reuben Wright III.
Quick aside, it was a moment for me when I remember as a student, you pushing Reuben around in a stroller, and then the next thing I know, I'm at a banquet and he's having a drink with me, and I'm saying, "Whoa, how did that happen?"
Yes. Well, Reuben got his undergrad degree from Newhouse and the Maxwell School, and then he got his master's degree from Newhouse. And right now, he's a big marketing, digital media expert with a company here in Syracuse right there. He's also ran the operation with WCNY. Then he was working with Legends, a big group with the athletic program here in Syracuse. And some guys called him up and offered another job even bigger. But he's JPZ or two. But the point I'm making is just thinking about, I think of Cousin Danny and Larry Barron doing that morning show where they call over to the Tri-Delt sorority. And they call over and they said they were the management of the Sheraton Hotel on the air. You think of Howard Stern, all the prank phone calls that are done on the air. This is the one that I never will ever forget. Okay, but these are what I'm getting at. Radio's ability to localize with live local announcers in the studio is still its greatest attribute. And I go over to WJPZ with that beautiful facility we got with all that great equipment and everything, and there's nobody there. The computer is running it. I mean, there's students around who do show up, but the days when the JPZ I remember grew up with 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, including holidays, somebody was back to keep the station on the air, and always you had someone live there in the studios.
Well, you actually are teeing me up for the other question that I was going to ask you, because I think there are some who would push back on what you just said and say the idea of JPZ is to train students to work in commercial radio. And you know this better than anybody, Dr. Wright. The state of commercial radio, I was going to ask you about your thoughts on this. There are a lot of computers, and I think there was an article written that said that there were more commercial radio stations in Syracuse than DJs at one point.
Yes.
So in a way, it's kind of a reflection of where the industry is right now.
But you know what, John? The industry right now, I think it's in sort of they kind of overpriced radio back in the 1990s.
Telecom Act of 96 and everything after that, sure.
And basically, we got companies that got, I think, too big. One company owning all these stations, by the way. Then an economic downturn happened. And trying to stay afloat, this is one group, I won't even mention their name, they sold off a bunch of stations one day for cash flow problems. Those problems are still on the table. What's really saving them, these stations, is basically running them with no people, no payroll.
Yeah.
But what is sad about this moment is radio's ability to entertain, to communicate, inform, and educate audiences is incredible when you have live people in the studio. And what's so fat and great there, the technology that we have there. You can do some incredible stuff. But the bottom line is we have technology leading the process. Got it?
Mm-hmm.
And we should have people in the studios leading the technology in the creation of content. And what I'm getting at, a lot of our students of this generation, they haven't heard the radio stations when you had 7 announcers at one station, working the different day parts, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The days when, say if it's a big concert's going to be in town, maybe Prince, Elton John, by the way, was just here in Syracuse a couple of weeks ago. I think it's his last show here at the
great show. I heard
at the Dome, big show. I think it drew like 40,000 people. Well, Prince came in a big show here in the 80s. He drew 45,000 people to what was called then the Carrier Dome.
Of course.
And there's a new title.
I think we're all still calling it the Carrier Dome.
Yeah, it's a new title. They put new signs on the building right now as we speak.
What's the running joke? The Carrier Dome didn't have air conditioning and the JMA Wireless Dome doesn't have good Wi-Fi?
Well, JMA, I think they're trying to straighten it out quick, but you're right. You're definitely right. In fact, they put a new name, JMA, big new, they big developers the 5K network, which they're working on right now. And by the way, we got a new situation just happened. In fact, Syracuse, this area of central New York, just landed a major game changer in Micron. They're coming to town.
Yes, the chips, producing the chips.
The things that basically is in every electronic device that we use for memory Syracuse will become the capital of the world in the area of semiconductors and chips. So that's just getting ready to be named. But again, the point I'm getting back is, boy, and to all our the new group of radio broadcasters who want to get into our industry, man, every town had that radio star that we don't have now. One size does not fit all. I'm talking about syndication.
Of course.
And I'm talking about voice tracking. I mean, here's a company now, got one announcer who's voice tracking in 8 or 9 markets. And they're just basically introing the music, and they're talking about they're driving people. Go to our website if you want to find out the latest happening in your community. Well, hell, you on the air. Why don't you tell me what's happening on the air right there? And, the sociological differences, every city is different.
Yes.
And I remember as a young kid, man, in Elizabeth City, North Carolina, my mother, Miss Lily Mae Wright, Mom used to she used to work for a very wealthy doctor who loved radios, and he knew I loved electronics and radios. And every time he bought new radios, he would give me his old radios. And my mother brought home one time a Helicrafters S38D 6-band shortwave receiver that would pick up, the medium wave band and all the shortwave bands. And I ordered an antenna system from Allied Radio out of Chicago. Those days we could, like you guys can order something else in your house within 5 hours, but those days I had to wait 2 weeks, and I got saved my money. And I put up this antenna, 75-foot antenna between the house and another building. And I would sit there at DX radio stations at night with the headphones on in my bedroom.
Oh, you could pick up anything. WBZ, KDKA, all those clear channel stations.
Man,
yeah.
I couldn't wait for the sun to go down. Those big powerhouse AMers. But the thing is, here I'm in Elizabeth City, North Carolina in the wintertime. And there was a big disc jockey called the Hound Dog, broadcasting on KB, WKBW, Buffalo, 1520 on the dial. Now, here's a kid who's never been upstate New York, and I'm listening to KB at night, and he gives a weather forecast. Talking about snowstorm coming off of Lake Erie. I've never really seen snow before. But then, of course, here's SB Atlanta or WLAC, Nashville, Tennessee, which had an all-night urban show with John Richburg, Oss Allen, Gene Nobles, man, 50,000 waters. And what I'm getting at, all of these different radio stations, WABC New York, and I'm listening to WLS Chicago. Those live local announcers were giving you a sociological feel for where they were broadcasting from.
Yes.
And you were there listening to this, and you got that kaleidoscope, man, of America. And then, of course, I never forget that night, man, one night, a Sunday night, I'm trying to get WLAC, Nashville, Tennessee, which was urban. They had R&B at night and also gospel. Mm-hmm. And this night, that was a Chuck Berry record. Man, the signal was loud as could be. And all of a sudden, a guy came up on the air and said, "Hey, baby, you got the Wolfman here, Wolfman Jack."
Oh, wow.
On XERF, Del Rio, Texas. If you're like, gonna Mexico with 250,000 watts, baby. And the wolves are howling and everything. I said, and it was at 1520. No, it was, 1570 on the dial, because KB was at 1520. WLAC was 1510. And it was at 1570 on the dial. XERF, 250 watts. And Wolfman Jack, the first time I ever heard, I said, man, wow. But the point I'm getting at is that celebrity has not died, John, JG. You got it?
Yeah.
Celebrity. I mean, our populace right now, the demographic people, they love celebrity. And radio was the greatest creator of celebrities.
Agreed.
Every town had that one jock, that one DJ. And I was mentioning the Elton John concert, where you were on the air, and when a big act came to town, the first place that the act went to before they
radio
rejected to the hotel, they went to the radio station, right? And here you on the air, the Johnny G show. Here's Elton John coming in town, Syracuse. And you're on there, and also you open up the door to the control room, there's Elton John standing there.
He was still standing.
he comes in, and those days, you had flexibility with your format when you had to, of course, they already bought all this airtime in there, advertising the show. But the point I'm making is that every town had that one or two disc jockeys who were really, like they were the king of the show. And there's one statement I think I'll lay on you. My godmother, who I love so much, Mrs. Leola Dyson, WRAP, Norfolk, Virginia. And she taught me many things, but this is one thing she always told me about radio. She said, "Godson, Roosevelt." I said, "Yes, Mrs. Dyson, you love radio." And she said, "Here's what you got to do. When you get into a leadership role in radio broadcasting, you own your own station, you're programming it or whatever. What you want to do with your radio station is make your format, whatever. See, regardless, it could be urban, country, top 40, jazz, whatever, talk. No. What you want to do is make your format so compelling with entertainment, information, education, and reach out to the audiences that you are trying to serve, that you would make your radio station become a part of the family of your listeners."
She knew back then. It's still true now.
And she said, "Now, this is when you know you have won. Here's some robbers who have just broken into a house, all right? And they got these people at gunpoint." and then they say, "Okay, I tell you what we're going to do. We'll give you a chance to make one phone call before we blow you away. Who does the family in trouble or distress?" That might be too much of a, or let's say the family just ran out of money or something.
No, but your point is well taken.
Who do they call? They don't call the police. They don't call City Hall. They call the disc jockey at the radio station. And they call the disc jockey at the radio station because everybody's listening to that jock locally. What I'm getting at, Mrs. Dyson says that when people are in trouble, they call the radio station. When they call the radio station, instead of calling the police, you know you've won with regards to the power, of your radio station in that particular community or demographic that you're serving.
I like that. Last radio question for you related to that. Do you think, and we won't mention the big companies by name, but we all know who you're talking about, if smaller companies can take back over and put live local DJs that become parts of the community back in place, can that save radio at this point?
Yes, it can. And that is what's going to save radio. Boy, I've been writing radio off ever since the 1920s. Well, not writing, it was getting going.
Ever since TV started.
It's just television started, and radio had to find a new direction to go when television assumed the format of radio. And prime time, of course, was for television became that, 8 to 12 midnight, time day part for television. So radio had to reinvent itself. And of course, what was available were live DJs and music, of course. And then the sociological impact of music. We got to go into the history of rhythm and blues and rock and roll music that was there and all those artists that popped up, created, then we had our diversification of formats and all. But the thing I'm getting at is this. The fire sale is coming. Okay. Dr. Roosevelt Rick Wright Jr. speaking to John on his great podcast celebrating the 50th anniversary of WJPZ Radio here at Syracuse University, which is a leader in mass communications. And the thing I want to indicate is the fire sale is coming. And that fire sale that's coming is going to allow us to get back to locally owned radio stations.
I can only hope for the sake of radio, you are right.
I'm just saying, this is going to happen. I'm telling you. And to all our great leaders who are running the industry right now, a lot of you guys want to sell and get out of the business, but we got a whole new generation of broadcasters like here at Syracuse being trained. And I'm still around campus. I retired 10 years ago, about 9 years ago from the faculty, but I'm still around as a professor emeritus, and I'm working with doctoral students, graduate students, and the sports media program at Newhouse. I get calls all the time to come over to talk to the students, especially this year. I got some great graduate students. So I keep laying on them, decide just hang on, because I said the key thing is to get into an ownership at a decision-making level. Because radio, radio is the most highly efficient, inexpensive tool to reach people. I know we got the internet. We know we got all these other platforms. I was just looking at a story on I got one of the stories, one of the big publications. It's a Radio World. Well, just looking at it this morning and looking at the photographs of the hurricane that just wiped out Southwest Florida.
Yeah.
And They were saying a radio station that was in fact, that the station that got wiped out down there, they got back on the air, is Renda, one of our WJPZ.
Tony Renda.
Tony, I think that's got to be, it said Renda Broadcasting. Station got work, but they were able to get that baby back on the air. But the point I'm getting at, when all the power is gone, disaster struck, the electricity is gone, man, the internet, all these tools we got is gone. But guess what? There's a thing called radio broadcasting. Radio station with a generator running, get a microphone, a board, to plug that baby in. And of course, now everybody's got these mobile phones and stuff. Maybe you might go through a grid to get that, but you still the old transistor radio with, 2 AA batteries in it, gives you a system of communication.
Absolutely.
So what I'm getting with all these great technological tools that we got are wiped out in a disaster, a big baby called radio broadcasting can be put in place quickly. Terrestrial radio, right signal, right power, with somebody behind that microphone say, hey, folks, hey, collision is coming. You got to run for cover. But right now, there's nobody in the radio station to do what, John? To say, run for cover. Something real simple.
Last question for you, Dr. Wright, and thank you so much for being so generous with your time today. The WJPZ Alumni Association that you see every year, every March or February in Syracuse.
Yes.
What is your takeaway or your message to the Alumni Association? And we have gotten so much from you out of the last 50 years. What have you gotten out of the group as a whole of the Alumni Association?
I tell you, for me, as a guy, poor guy who grew up in northeastern North Carolina, family was not wealthy, but dad was a real good provider. I mean, I grew up in the industry. And in my wildest dreams, I never would realize that I would have ended up 40 years on a great university like Syracuse, and probably the #1 school in mass communications and teach. And now in retirement, man, to be home and to listen to the radio. And I just, like the other day, I turned the TV on and I switched over to CBS to watch the nightly news, and up popped Scotty McFarland.
Yep.
And tears flows when I see this. I said, my God, here's a WJPZer and I'm bringing up Scott because y'all have changed the bingo scenario around, and now you do it differently. Would not just be given the speech. You got Scotty McFarland over the last few years, who was the biggest broadcaster at CBS in the world. He's covering Congress. And of course, right, all the political scenarios we got in Washington. Scott's getting a lot of airtime. And he is the person who was interviewing me during the banquet. I mean, there's so many just different stories. And it's really, I'm a really emotional guy. Be sitting there in the room by myself, the tears are flowing of joy, man, knowing that I had an opportunity to at least be in y'all's lives to help you get that. And right now, look what is happening today. I'm on this nice facility here at Byrd Library, all this computer equipment and the system that we're using to broadcast this message to the whole world. And John, you are the interviewer. Major market, baby. Major market. A+++ again, John.
I appreciate you changing the grade in hindsight. Dr. Rick Wright, always a pleasure. Can't wait to see you for the banquet celebrating our 50th anniversary. And thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you so much. And to the WJPZ family, baby. Dr. Rick Wright from the top of Mount Olympus. WJPZ Radio, Syracuse, New York, signing off.
The WJPZ at 50 podcast is created entirely by the staff and alumni of the world's greatest media classroom.
It's hosted by John Jag Gay, class of 2002. Editing help from James Bames Grundy III, class of 2020.
Imaging by Maureen Cooper, class of 1999.
And Ed Lacombe, class of 1985.
Podcast artwork by Marty Dundix, class of 2001.
Follow WJPZ at 50 on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube,
or wherever you're listening right now.